And at the end, Lily will answer your questions. So we are all going to be muted. I'm going to hand the microphone to you, Lily, and you could start. Good luck.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I knew this would be fun, and I'm just so overwhelmed to see so many people that I know and love, and just so many friendly faces. So it's just such a joy to be with you virtually. And I'm really honored by the turnout. So thank you all so much for coming and spending some time with me. I am going to, let's see, yes, share my screen with you all. And so, let's see if I can get it together. There we go. Start at the beginning. So I will introduce myself, although, like I said, it's such a joy that I know so many of you. But I did want to take a moment and acknowledge the moment that we are all living through. And as some of you know, I am calling in from Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm on the edge of my seat, just like all of you. And I will understand if you have another tab open and you're just hitting refresh on the New York Times. I get it, that's fine. And, you know, before I started officially, I thought I better just acknowledge what we're all living through. And I did consider, do I need to change this presentation? I'm going to be talking about volunteerism, which is how I spend most of my time. I'm kind of a professional volunteer now. And I thought about, do I need to change the topic? And I decided not to, one, because I'm not a political scientist, two, because maybe this will be a nice break for all of us who've been living and breathing the election for the past days, weeks, months. But three, because I considered, why does this matter so much? Why are we so invested? And I think part of the answer, or a lot of the answer for me, is that I care about the laws and policies that will be made as a result of the election. And in thinking about elections and policy as one form of social change, it takes a long time. So even if the election has the outcome that we hope for and we get the leaders we want, making laws takes time, funding them takes more time, implementing them takes even more time. And so in thinking about that spectrum of social change, I see policy as the long-term solution that we're all working towards. And I see volunteer service as the short term, as the way that we take care of each other in the meantime, because volunteers and the organizations that we all work for are the people who ensure that folks are eating tonight and folks have a place to sleep and wash their hands tonight, and that students are going to be tutored tomorrow, even as we wait for the results of this election and for the laws and policies and programs that are going to make longer term change. So that's the context that I'm sitting in right now, is going back to that short term. And I think it's also a great way for us to channel some of our energy and anxiety as we wait. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna skip this, Fulton County. Okay, so I know most of you, which is really fun, but I will introduce myself anyway. I'm Lily Brent. I am a proud daughter of Princeton and of Sally Steinberg and Dan Brent, who are on the call. I went to nursery school at the Jewish Center, went to Hebrew school through the age of 16. I led children's services until I graduated from high school. And I thought it would be really fun to include a picture of me at my bat mitzvah at the Jewish Center, which may be how a lot of you picture me, and got a big laugh from my staff when they saw this in our presentation software today. So if you had a chance to look at my bio, I've been up to quite a few things since high school, but right now I am the director of Repair the World Atlanta. And Repair the World is a national Jewish nonprofit that is dedicated to mobilizing the Jewish community in volunteer service. And I'm going to talk about volunteerism, sort of the philosophy and the implementation of it, And I think in a typically Jewish way, I'm going to bring a little bit of a critical analysis that I hope will be interesting for you. I'm happy to talk more about repair and about the specific programs we run at the end. But I'll just say a word about it now. We run a full-time fellowship for young adults in 7 cities, much like AmeriCorps or Avoda, but with the added component of doing community organizing and volunteer mobilization in addition to direct service. Under COVID, we've added a part-time option for college students and for unemployed or underemployed young adults who can earn a stipend for volunteering with us 10 hours a week. And part of our approach to service, which you'll get more of a feel for as we go, is that we believe it's not only about taking action to care for our neighbors and our communities and meet their urgent needs, but it has to be accompanied by learning and by reflection. And so we infuse learning into everything we do as part of our fellowship. Our short-term service corps members do 2 hours of learning a week in addition to their 10 hours of service. And we actually do a lot of programs like this where you can come and volunteer with us, but you can also do a deeper dive into a particular topic or issue area. So we talk a lot about historical context. We talk about geographic context. We talk about systemic poverty and structural racism. And we also always include some Jewish learning. So there will be some pieces of that in the presentation as well. That's good about repair. Okay. So this is what we're going to talk about. I've introduced myself. I'm going to give you a chance in a second to weigh in a bit. I'm going to talk about volunteering and asset-based community development, which is a topic that I love. And if you don't know what that is, you will by the end of this. And then I'll leave some time for questions and discussions. And as Riva said, I'm so thrilled that there are more than 40 people on this call, but we're going to stick to the chat until the end. Because yeah, I think 40 Jews talking at once might be a little much, but we will have some time at the end for more open discussion. Okay, so we're going to use that chat box. So I would like you to tell me a little bit about yourself, maybe something I don't know for those of you that I do know very well. So the first prompt, I'm going to have you introduce yourself in 4 ways. The first is, think about a time that you had to ask for help. What did that feel like? And will you share 1 word about that experience in the chat? So go ahead and type 1 word. What did it feel like the time that you had to ask for help? Do folks know how to find the chat?
On the screen.
Okay, starting to see it. So I see humility, vulnerable twice. Should be for folks on the bottom of your screen. If you scroll down, you should see a little talk bubble. And if you press on that, you should be able to chat. And you can send to the whole group. Some of you are sending just to me, which is also okay. Whole group is not available. Okay, I will read these out loud. That is fine. Okay, so folks are sharing that asking for help has often felt difficult, awkward, humbling, vulnerable. Okay, let's move to the next one. Think about a time, maybe a recent time, that you offered help. How did that feel?
Somebody to push me to my bed.
Give us 1 word about how that felt when you got to offer to help someone else. So I see rewarding, satisfying. Maybe we can get 1 or 2 more. Felt good. So I think that alone is pretty fascinating, right? These are two sides of the same experience. And one feels really difficult and awkward and vulnerable, and the other feels empowering and fulfilling and enabling and natural and satisfying and purposeful and all these other positive things. And there's a lot of good psychological research out there about one of the best things you can do for your own well-being is help someone else. And I think part of what I want to talk about is the how matters. How we approach helping other folks matters, because ideally, we don't want that experience to be difficult or awkward or humiliating. We want it to be a positive experience too. Okay, so this one you do not have to type in the chat, but I want you to think about your worst quality, the one that you wrestle with the most, the one you are most ashamed of. And imagine if you had to introduce yourself to the group with that word, whatever it is. So you don't have to type it to me, but just think about it. And my last question is, why do you think I asked you to introduce yourself in these ways? Why is this relevant to the topic of volunteering? So you can type me your answer in the chat, or I don't know if you have the power to unmute yourself, but if you would like to, I'd love to hear a couple of thoughts on why would I open with these? Kind of an unusual way to introduce yourself. Why is this relevant? So one of the things they teach you in social work school is that whenever you ask a question, you should wait at least 7 seconds for someone to answer. And my trick is usually that I tell that story because it takes about 7 seconds. Okay. So let's see, did anybody, some people answered. Okay, so folks answered so that we can know what other people feel, so that we can be empathetic when we volunteer, a summation of parties involved in the volunteer experience, and volunteering shouldn't be as much about helping yourself as it is helping others. When one is going to volunteer, one has to have an understanding of these feelings. Yeah. Okay, so hold these in mind. Hopefully, if it's not clear to you now why I would ask these questions, it'll become clear. So I want to talk about 4 different types of volunteering. I think there's a spectrum here. And in my 16-year career, I have worked for a lot of different nonprofits. I've worked in 7 countries, worked for government. And the one thing that I've learned that I really enjoy talking about and sharing with others is that it's really hard to just do a good thing for someone else. It's actually really complicated. It seems like it should be really simple, and it just isn't. And so what I think is interesting is this spectrum, and I think we all probably move back and forth on it quite a bit. From when we're attempting to help someone else, sometimes we can accidentally do harm. And at best, our act of helping, our act of service is transformative. So I want to talk about some different examples on the spectrum of this experience. And this isn't meant to be depressing or discouraging. I think the idea is that, like so many things in our lives, if we bring mindful attention to the way that we engage with others and the way that we're helping, we can power our good intentions into good results. And so that's really the goal of the conversation, is to come to a place of how do we take those good intentions and good feelings and make sure that the other person, the person on the receiving end, is feeling as good as we are. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the harmful, because I actually think most of us don't spend that much time on this part of the spectrum, but I think it's interesting. And I chose some examples here. First of all, these are all from Instagram. So I don't know how much any of y'all are on Instagram, but you might be surprised that there's a lot of great educational work that happens. And one of the things I like about it is it's very visual and it offers bite-sized learning. And so these are some examples from 2 accounts that I follow. One's called No White Saviors, it's pretty self-explanatory, and the other is Barbie Savior. And they point out some of the pitfalls of international aid. And I choose these examples not because we couldn't find them in the US context, we certainly can, but I think sometimes it's easier for us to recognize them. They're a little more stark in the international context. So all the way on the left-hand side, you can read the quote, and the image below is also from No White Saviors. And sometimes our volunteerism can be self-serving, right? So I think one question we can ask is, when is this feeding our own ego? And I think in this culture, if you have volunteered internationally or you know someone who has, you've probably seen this picture of a whole bunch of children living in poor conditions, and like this really proud volunteer lined up in front of them to say, like, look how great I am, look what I am doing. And one of the things the folks who run the No White Savior account out of Uganda, one of the things they talk about a lot is this an experience that I would want to have or that I would find acceptable for my children? So like, would you want a stranger photographing your child being examined by a doctor? Like, would that feel invasive? And so asking that question often like gives us a line separating between, are we treating somebody with dignity or are we serving our own ego? So Barbie Savior is just meant to be really funny. I don't know if y'all can read the caption, but Barbie Savior says, the lack of high heels in this country is devastating. So today, one heel at a time, I am changing the face of Africa as we know it. So like funny, tongue in cheek. And actually, there's a lot of examples of this where when we unpack it, it's about somebody with resources and privilege deciding what other people need without talking to them about it first and really going off in the wrong direction. So like the high heels is a great example, but how many organizations could we look at and on a less dramatic scale find that somebody who really doesn't understand the context is making a lot of decisions and spending a lot of money without consulting the folks who are most affected by the problem, and wasting a lot of time and resources. And the final picture is just a stock photo of a garbage dump, but one of the examples that I think of a lot is in Haiti after the earthquake, folks sent container loads of supplies, lovely intentions, but not the right stuff because folks didn't know what was needed in Haiti. And so that became a tremendous burden that on top of trying to house and feed and provide medical care to people displaced and injured by the earthquake, folks in Haiti had to figure out what to do with massive amounts of supplies that they couldn't use that sat around in piles like this one. So thinking about, when do our good intentions become a burden on other people because we maybe didn't do our research? Okay, so in the next category, is the idea of transactional volunteering. And I think this is where a lot of organizations and a lot of us sit a lot of the time. It's the most pragmatic, it's the most efficient, and the easiest to scale. And the way I would describe it is you have two static roles. On one side, you have the people with the resources and the expertise. And on the other side, you have the people who have a need, and they always stay in those positions. And you have the haves over here and the have-nots over here, and the givers on this side and the recipients who humbly say thank you for whatever they can get on this side. And so this model is, a lot of food pantries and soup kitchens and any place where you are transferring something from one group of people to another. And I think a lot of good work does happen this way. People get fed and housed and clothed, and that's really important. And so the 4 questions that I put here, take us a little deeper into the analysis of like, why is this a problem? What's wrong with that? Like, isn't it a good thing if I have extra food and I give it to you because you didn't have any? And yes, it is. But I think the point is we can do a little better. So the questions that I ask are, what do the volunteers look like and what do the beneficiaries look like? And I think it's important to ask that critical question because when you start to layer in historical context, you understand why there's often a difference between the two groups and you can easily tell. So not only internationally, but in the cities I lived in DC, in Atlanta, volunteers are often white and wealthy, and beneficiaries are often low-income people of color. And that's not to say that low-income people of color don't volunteer. They absolutely do. There's a lot to unpack there around what we call volunteering. So helping out a neighbor, something that doesn't happen through an organization, we don't call it volunteering. We don't necessarily count it that way. And then also a lot of work that happens through faith communities like ministry, we also don't identify as volunteering. But I think there's a critical question to be asked about what context are we missing if people are frozen in these roles? And are we just giving our cans, or are we asking like, hey, why is the median income in this neighborhood $25,000 and two miles away the median income is $80,000? And why do we also have racial segregation along those lines? Which is very much true in Atlanta in 2020. So bringing a critical lens to why are volunteers and beneficiaries from certain identity groups, why are they frozen in place, and how might we be just reinforcing that problem if we don't bring a critical eye to the organizations that we work with. Another reason this is problematic is, where do ideas and solutions come from? So when you're frozen in these roles, we're only looking at this one group of people as the bringers of solutions and the givers. And they are endowed with that privilege because they have wealth. And it means that in a way we're dehumanizing and undervaluing the folks who might be in need of a service, because we don't ever look to them for solutions or ideas, or ask questions about how they got into the situation that we're in. And so just like that's the problem with Barbie Savior, it's actually a problem with our community organizations as well. So question 3 is kind of the same. Who has power and control? Who decides how funds are used and which programs are implemented? And if those aren't the people who are living the problem and closest to the problem, we're really likely to be missing something crucial. And again, what's the long-term impact of these dynamics? So if this only happens once, it's not really a problem. But when we look at, a food bank that's celebrating its 75th anniversary, and we don't ask why in the wealthiest country in the world do we have a food bank 75 years later, and why is it only serving certain people on certain side of town, we're missing something. We're missing race and class dynamics and pieces of our history that we need to get to with those larger policy solutions that I mentioned earlier. Okay. So relational volunteering is, I think, where we strive to and what we achieve a lot in my work, not all the time, but some of the time. So I'm going to tell a couple of stories from my own experience. So in these pictures are some of my fellows in Atlanta from last year. So on the top is Ben, who spent a year doing service with an organization called Mind Bubble, which is a free tutoring program. And part of their philosophy is that after tutoring is finished, the tutors and the students sit together and they play games. And one of the reasons for that is because they believe in the educational power of games to teach critical thinking. But it also kind of disrupts the power dynamic between teacher and student, and they get to have a relationship outside of tutoring. So I see that as relational volunteering. You are with the same people week after week, you are getting to know them. On the bottom left is SWEAC, which is the Southwest Ecumenical Emergency Assistance Center. It is was founded by a consortium of 7 churches, and it is a food pantry that is in the basement of West Hunter Street Baptist Church, which, if you know your civil rights history, was Ralph David Abernathy's church. And it's a soup kitchen, it's a food pantry, and it runs just like a typical food pantry. And the reason that for me it ends up in this category is that many of the people who receive food from SWEAC are also volunteers. And so when you go and volunteer there, you don't know who the beneficiaries are and who the volunteers are. You don't know if the person who is serving next to you is also going to take home food at the end of the night because they have nothing in their pantry and they're earning minimum wage and they can't provide for their family. And so it allows us to be in relationship with each other and to seamlessly change and exchange roles and see each other as more than unidimensional. And so I think in that way, it sounds really complicated, but sometimes it's not. There's a way to do things differently and mix things up that allows for people's full humanity and acknowledges that all different kinds of people from different income backgrounds and life experiences can give. Similarly, on the top right is some volunteers with Concrete Jungle and my fellow Cecilia all the way on the right. And the story that I like to tell about them is a little bit of a COVID response story. So in March, I was calling all of our service partners to just try and figure out what was going on. And SWEAC feeds 400 people a week. And on March 12th, whatever that Friday was, they were told that they would not be receiving any food delivery because they get all of their food from grocery store excess. And as you probably recall, there was no grocery store excess when COVID hit. People were panic buying, there wasn't food on the shelves, and all the grocery stores that would normally donate could not. And so SWEAC shut its doors, and we had 400 people representing 400 families in our community who not only couldn't stock up the way the rest of us were being told to at that time, but were literally going to go home empty-handed to absolutely no food because there was just nothing. And so Concrete Jungle, they're a gleaning organization, amazingly, that exists. They have mapped 3,000 fruit trees in Atlanta, and they take volunteers to public or abandoned land. They harvest fruit and they donate it to pantries like SWEAC so that they can have fresh produce in addition to shelf-stable goods. And they also have a vegetable farm where they grow their own vegetables and donate the food. And so Concrete Jungle, we had a little conference and we were pretty horrified that these 400 families were going to go without. And so with no planning and no money, we invented something called the COVID-19 Grocery Delivery Project and bought food in bulk, packaged it, and got volunteers to do a no contact drop to SWEAC. And 8 months into that project, SWEAC has reopened at about half capacity, and we are still delivering food to all of those families. And we've taken on an additional 200 families who are all over Fulton and DeKalb counties. Atlanta's split between 2 counties. And we do a no contact drop of food at the door of those 400 families every single week. We've been doing it for 8 months. Some of the food we buy, some of it gets grown or harvested or donated. That's just a story that I love and I'm really proud of. But similarly to SWEAC, Concrete Jungle has a lot of volunteers who are also beneficiaries. And they have a principle of hiring from the center. So whenever they have a staff role open up, they try to hire a longtime volunteer and they try to prioritize volunteers who are also beneficiaries. So I think that also changes their organization and makes it more relational in that they are acknowledging the value of the experience of people who have been on the beneficiary side and welcoming them into leadership in their organization. The last picture on the bottom left is of me and my fellows last year. They have a 3-hour seminar every week. And one of my favorite guest speakers is the woman in the middle. Her name is Brianna Doralis. And she runs a consulting company called Connecting the Cause, which helps nonprofits and faith-based organizations transform their volunteer operations. And she teaches a wonderful seminar called Dignity and Inclusion for Volunteers of Color, which I highly recommend. But one of the questions that she asked that I think is a great benchmark is, what do I know about this person beyond the context of what I am giving to them? And so I think that's how you know when you're in relationship, is if you know something about the person you're serving beyond the context of how you are serving them. And that's not always appropriate, right? Like you might not want to hold up the line at the soup kitchen to say like, hey, what's your mother's maiden name? Where were you born? But I think the idea is if you are volunteering consistently within a community, you are able to build relationships and encounter people beyond the single dimension of need that can be really dehumanizing. And going back to our own experiences of when we had to ask for help, part of what makes that unpleasant, difficult, and forces us into a position of humility is that people are only seeing us based on our need and not as whole people. And so when we try to find those opportunities to build relationship, that's when it becomes a human to human experience and not kind of trapped in this dynamic of only one person has something to offer. Okay, so final category here is transformational. And this one is aspirational for me. I don't think we get there very often. Like, how often does an act of service really transform somebody's life? But I think that we do have partners who do it really well. And so I want to just play a short video from one of our partners, Historic Westside Gardens. Oops, and I'm realizing I have to share my sound with you all in order to do that. So give me 1 second. Gonna bop through the slides here. And let's see, how do I share my screen? Okay, share computer sound. Great. Okay, now we'll go back to sharing. We'll go back to the video. Here we
go. What connects us all? Is it the roads we travel or the buildings we live in? The tech in our hands or the places we convene? What if it's simply the food that we eat? See, food has the power to connect, to revitalize, to fix what is broken. For 10 years now, we've set out to grow and to connect a network of diverse communities by creating 160 urban gardens in the historic west side of Atlanta. From backyards to front yards to community hubs and small urban spaces, we are filling the gaps left behind, revitalizing the historic west side neighborhoods of Atlanta through the power of home food gardening. And 10 years is a great start, but there's so much left to do and impact we can make.
So Historic Westside Gardens just had their 10-year anniversary. And some of the things that I love about them and that I think get them into this category of transformational is that when they started, they planned to have community gardens on the west side of Atlanta, which is, depending on who you ask, about 4 to 6 neighborhoods. Median income is around $25,000. They're 80 to 90% African-American. And they are considered food deserts, meaning that you have to go more than a mile to find a grocery store with fresh produce. And a mile might not seem like very much unless you know that 40% of the residents in the neighborhood do not own cars, and we have very poor public transit infrastructure in Atlanta. So when you think about walking a mile to get your groceries and walking back, or riding on the bus system, and layer on top of that riding the bus during COVID, not having a grocery store within a mile is pretty debilitating, takes a lot of time and energy out of your life. So they wanted to plant these community gardens, and what they learned when they consulted with residents was that nobody was interested in that, and that there was a strong tradition of kitchen gardens, and people were really interested in growing their own food at home. So they hired and trained garden coaches. So they employed people from the community to go door to door and to bring free seeds and fertilizer and coach people on growing their own gardens. So they now support 160 home gardeners on the west side. And the spaces that they planned as community gardens are now what they call garden hubs. So people who can't plant at home because they don't have the space can have their own individual bed in the hub. And so the fact that they consulted with the community and they changed their whole plan based on what they heard is one of the things that I really respect about them. And also Gil Frank, who's the guy that you can see in the beret at the top of this video, is a dear friend and mentor and is one of the co-founders of Historic Westside Gardens. I rarely see him without the beret. He's French, and he spent a lot of time in Israel and is also Jewish. And he co-founded the organization with somebody from the West Side who was unfortunately killed in a car accident. And so he ran the organization by himself most of these 10 years. And the other thing that I think is really extraordinary about them, so first of all, they committed, their board has, in their bylaws, mandated that at least 50% of their board are historic West Side residents. It's a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, so historic is important. You can't be newly moved to the area. You have to be somebody who has lived there a certain amount of time. And even more than that, he made a commitment to transitioning the leadership of the organization to somebody local. And something that we hear a lot is that in under-resourced neighborhoods, all this money goes to nonprofits, but none of the jobs go to people from the neighborhood, and nobody supports them in creating their own nonprofits, which is a kind of arduous and expensive legal process. And so he was really committed to making sure that he turned over the reins and got people to invest in local leadership. And so if you look at this picture on the left, Rosario Hernandez is in the middle, and she took over last April as executive director. And so I think that those pieces, consulting with community, making sure community holds a majority stake in leadership, are part of what make this organization a great example. All right. Okay. So a lot of what I have just discussed can be captured in under the umbrella of asset-based community development. And I wanted to give you a lot of my own examples, but we probably could have just watched this video from Cormac Russell, who gives a great TED talk about it. So I'm going to show you a couple minutes of this as well that I think sums it up really nicely. Let's start at minute 6:53 here. Oops.
Live well and age well close to home. And also associate.
Sorry, 6:35. There we go.
Community builders. I've had the privilege of coming alongside. If our traditional ways of helping people were flipped. If instead of focusing on what was wrong with individuals and indeed with entire communities, we started with a focus on what's wrong. And then we figured out how to negotiate a new relationship, a more respectful relationship. I think what would happen is that we would see transformation in a way that we could never have imagined. Fortunately, it's already happening. We're doing some work, and we've had the privilege of coming alongside some community builders in Leeds. Leeds is a city, as you know, in the UK. And over the years, we've trained a number of community builders in the city council, but also in the neighbourhood networks. In Leeds, one of the things they care deeply about is how older people can live well and age well close to home. And also how they can ensure that those that are aging do not die with an experience of loneliness and feelings of uselessness. One of the things that they've also come to understand is that there is no program and there is no service for loneliness. The only way that we can address loneliness is by building community, by building deep relationships. And so traditional models which take older people and put them together with other older people in programs for older people will not be sufficient to end loneliness. Today in Leeds, their focus is not on building a bridge between older, vulnerable people and the centre of their services, but on building a bridge between older people and the centre of community life. Take Robin. Robin was in his mid-70s when he first came in contact with a community builder that we trained in Leeds. He had just lost his wife, and he was experiencing all of the challenges and the traumas that you experience with bereavement. But the community builder that engaged with Robin didn't just listen to those emotions, though she listened. She also asked Robin what his passions were, what he cared about enough to act upon, what made his eyes dance in his head. And what Robin said when she asked those questions was, he was passionate about making walking sticks. That was his great passion, taking branches from fallen trees and carving them into walking sticks. Today, Robin is a leader of a group that he set up, made up of all age groups, who are learning how to make walking sticks and sharing those walking sticks with people in the community. The significance of the story is this: Robin is not a client in a service. Robin is a citizen at the center of his community, using his gifts along with the gifts of his neighbors to make a better community and a more inclusive community. So often when we label people as vulnerable or as deficient or as problematic, what we actually do is we define them out of community and redefine them not as friend and as neighbor, but as client in a service system. And I think that when we do that, we take some of the soul away from the person, all in the name of helping them. Sometimes we don't just do that to individuals. In many communities around the world, we've actually done it to entire villages, in some cases, entire continents. We have to figure out a way of lifting those labels which obscure the gifts of communities, the resources, the capacities, the untapped reservoir of possibility and creativity and invention that exists in every single community, if only we could focus on what was strong within them so that they could use that strength to address what's wrong. Well, one of the places where we're learning a lot about how to make those invisible resources more visible is in a place called Wirral, another place in the UK. One of our community builders has been working across the world to find the hidden treasures that exist in that community. And one of the people that we've discovered is Frank. Frank is a community artist who...
Okay, I'm actually not going to go into Frank and his pirate ship, but I think you get the idea here. Okay, so I'm going to move into the last piece, and maybe while I'm doing this, Riva or whoever else is at the controls, you can turn on the community chat and also the ability for people to unmute themselves. We are getting into the discussion portion, but I wanted to bring in a little bit of Jewish wisdom here, as is our wont at Repair. And so I took an example. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I hope you'll appreciate it. I took a well-known hero from our Jewish canon, and I thought about if I was a social worker receiving his dossier, what would I learn about him? And so those are the pieces on the left here. This person has a speech impediment. He was adopted. That might show up in his file. He has a violent criminal record, and he's been off the grid for several years. So sit with that for a second. How do you feel about this person, knowing that information? Looking forward to spending time with him, sharing space with him, inviting him into your organization, probably feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And I tried to think, okay, if I was trying to come from this asset-based approach and focusing on what's strong instead of what's wrong, as Cormac Russell likes to say, what would I share about this person? What could I think of that was positive? So he is passionate about justice. He is willing to sacrifice personally. He's very motivated to help other people, and he's resilient. He's been through a lot and come out the other side. So I don't know how that feels looking at the left and right. Like, do these qualities that I'm telling you about really outweigh some of the deficits that I've outlined? Can anybody guess if I say biblical Jewish hero, like who is this person?
Moses.
Yes, it's Moses. So I think there's a lesson there, right? There's a lesson all the way back in our foundational text about who is fit for leadership, right? This is the person that God chose for, possibly the most pivotal task in all of our history. Maybe Abraham as well, who arguably had an anger management issue. But God chose somebody that the rest of us might never choose, especially if we were handed this file. And I think there's a lesson for us in that, one that we don't often pay attention to. And I think we can credibly say that this asset-based approach is something that God built into our foundational text and story for us. So another little piece of Jewish wisdom. Oh, in my picture, I had a beautiful picture of date palms, which apparently didn't load, which is fine. So there's also this text from Bamidbar Rabbah, a commentary on the Book of Numbers about the date palm and how the people of Israel, or you can extend that to humanity, are like the date palm. And the point is that we use every single part of the date. We eat the fruit. We use the branches for the lulav, the fronds for the sukkah. You can make rope out of it. You can make a sieve, apparently. You can use the trunk to build with. And this commentary says that the date palm is an analogy for Israel. There's no person that is worthless, right? We're all different. We all have different talents and capacities, but every single person is valuable, and we just have to recognize what their value or purpose is. So I think that that's another Jewish text that I can read as supporting this asset-based approach to community development. Okay, so where does this leave us? Again, like, this is not meant to be critical or depressing. We all need to keep serving. I think now more than ever, I think it's going to be a long haul in the next few months. And I think the point, a very Jewish point, is to ask questions and to be discerning, right? Like, which organizations are you going to offer your time and talent and treasure to, and how are you going to decide? So part of my job in setting up Repair in Atlanta, we were the organization's 7th site, and I opened it in 2018. I met with about 300 people, and I volunteered at about 45 organizations in order to choose where we would locate and who we would partner with. So these are some of the questions that I asked, and I hope, if anybody has more to add to the list, that you'll share them with us. But so in looking, like, where are you going to volunteer? Where are you going to donate? I think some important questions would be, is the leadership of the organization reflective of the population they serve? Are there opportunities for current or former beneficiaries to participate in leadership? How is the community involved in decision making? Again, if we take the idea that the people who are closest to the problem and who have experienced it probably have a lot of ideas about solutions that the rest of us might not see. Does the organization use an asset-based or deficit-based approach? And I think sometimes, like, those are some jargon, some technical terms, and you might think it's really hard to tell. It's not. What is the language in the mission? What kind of photographs do they use? How do they describe people? How do they talk about people? How do they train their volunteers? Do they use language that you would use in front of somebody? So when they talk about their beneficiaries, if those people were in the room, would you be uncomfortable? And finally, is this a place of dignity? If it came to it, would you seek services there? Would you recommend that a friend go there? If the answer is no, that's not an organization I would spend your time on. So I think, yes, the answer is to keep volunteering and also to ask these questions and to be discerning. This is my slide to remind me to plug Repair. I'm going to show you our website in a second. One of the byproducts of COVID has been that we're doing a lot more programming online, so you can join us. We have some volunteer opportunities and some educational programs. This is our social media, our Instagram and our Facebook. And one of the things that I'm proud of, so we put out a little educational segment every Friday. And we've been doing a series where we interview people in our community who take an asset-based approach. And we play a clip of their interview, and we call the series Visions for a Better Normal. So that's something that we put out on Facebook that you can look for. And I will take you over to our page and show you some of the events that we have coming up. Just give you a little taste. So we do still do in-person volunteering in small groups. We have something called our farm crew, where we take volunteers out to different urban farms and community gardens in South Atlanta.
Pickling for a purpose.
We do have pickling for a purpose. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the role of pickling in food preservation in different cultures. And we're also going to be doing a seed drive for historic West Side Gardens, who I just talked about, and doing some education on food deserts and why they exist. So we try to do a fun activity and sneak in some learning. We have a mental health Shabbat, which is a partnership with an organization called the Blue Dove, which raises awareness about mental health in the Jewish community. I think we could probably all use that. That's coming up November 20th. We have a series where we cook for shelters called Meal Wheels. And we have a bunch of virtual volunteering opportunities. So we have tutoring, we have mentoring, we have a lot of a lot of food banks have changed their hours. And so you can do some phone banking to let beneficiaries and service users know how they can access food banks and when. We're going to have a workshop on mutual aid, which I think is really cool and is one of those models that's less formalized, not always called volunteering or philanthropy, but how communities take care of each other. So yeah, we have lots of stuff going on and would definitely welcome you to join any of our virtual events. I think that's the end of my content. We have about 7 minutes. I would love to hear from folks. Did this resonate with you? Was it discouraging? Did this inspire you to think any differently about some volunteer work you're about to do? Anything else?
Can I say something? Ask?
Yeah.
Hi, Lily. Mazal tov again.
Thank you.
I love your presentation and you, of course.
Thank you.
One of the things that popped to my mind kind of immediately listening to you is the lack of talking about helping the need one, or you distinguish between the giver and the recipient, the one that says the thank you and the one that is giver, etc. Is how far, how much given to the need one, I will call it, to help himself. Mm-hmm. And not just because, I'm trying to follow, you put things in the context of Judaism, so I'm not trying to follow the Rambam or something, but I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was involved very intimately with helping people in a certain situation. And there is a point that you help for years and you realize that they don't help themselves. They're stuck. To the extremes, they can end up back in prison. And there is, limits to how much you can go and keep on going. So basically, I was surprised and I'm wondering that you didn't touch this point, because if it was for me, relate to your question, what kind of organization to join, this is one of the main things that I would ask myself. And it has to go with the dignity, of course. Mm-hmm. So, and other topics that you mentioned. But this is my main kind of jumping with this question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's an excellent point. And I think it's something Cormac Russell mentioned in his talk, and he went by rather quickly. But I think part of the point that he makes is that this transactional approach to helping is pathologizing, right? So it convinces people that they have nothing to offer, and it convinces communities they have nothing to offer. And it creates this mentality of looking to the outside for the solution. So I think part of my answer to your question would be that if we change our approach to helping, we also make space for people to bring their own solutions and to feel empowered to help themselves. And I was just looking at some comments I missed in the chat, and I see from the Oppenheim clan, the example that giving can destroy an indigenous agricultural system. So I think that's a great example that the US gives a lot of food aid, and up until the past few years, in the Farm Bill, it was mandated that we grow the food here in the US and we give it overseas, but that we didn't buy food from local economies to give to people who were hungry. And so, you can ask the question of like, well, why don't farmers help themselves? Why don't countries grow their own food and distribute it? But in our helping, we were actually bankrupting farmers and local systems, because why would you buy rice or grain when you could get it for free? So I think it's a both and, right? Which is another very Jewish concept. We definitely have to encourage people to help themselves. But I think part of that is getting out of the way and also building up people's vision of themselves as somebody with capacity and talent and ability, and nurturing that. And that is what allows them to bring their own solution. If we don't get in the way. Yeah, I see Shoshana.
So I was thinking recently I saw the film Shared Legacies about Black-Jewish relationships in the civil rights movement. And mostly it was very positive and touching, but it did really also refer to the somewhat of the breakup of that connection. And a lot had to do with the fact that the Blacks felt very strongly that, you know, they didn't really want, in a sense, white Jews running the civil rights organizations, and that they needed to, you know, become their own leaders. And so I was thinking a lot about that. And, you know, I was thinking also when you put up the chart about our interviewee, Moses, thinking that the one thing I would have added would be humble. And so perhaps that's something we need to teach in the Jewish community, that we need a sense of humbleness as we approach working with other people, that we can't go in with, in a sense of knowing all the answers and, you know, demanding to be the president of this or something on that. We really have to let people themselves take that kind of leadership. And that ties into what the previous person shared, that, you know, that's just a really very important thing. Otherwise, you know, they sort of take from us or accept the leadership until when they don't. And so we have to know, you know, how to approach.
Yeah, I think part of why I ended up working for a Jewish organization, it's not where I thought I would end up. But I think for myself, I had kind of a revelation. My last job was at CARE, which is an incredible organization that does amazing work in 94 countries. And I was working on a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And so I was like, in my own mind, at the top of the top, like really the highest caliber. And I was working on a grant for married adolescent girls in rural Niger. I spent a lot of time in Niger. I don't speak the language. I had these revelatory moments. Like I spent 6 months working on something that if I had been born in Niger, I would have known from minute one was a terrible idea. And nobody would tell me because everybody knew that I came with the money. And so whatever I wanted went. And no matter how many questions I asked or how much I tried to practice good consultation or inclusive leadership, people would never tell me no. And I think that you can do good work anywhere, but I think for myself, I really wanted to find a place where I didn't feel like I was taking somebody else's spot. And I really came to feel, what business do I have deciding how, in the end, it was about $7 million would be spent in rural Niger. No matter how much, you know, I could spend 10 years there. I could try to learn Hausa and Tuareg and all the other languages I would have needed to know. And would I ever make a better decision than somebody from Niger? I don't think so. So I think part of our work, depending on, you know, whatever identities we sit with, and certainly there are people who are both Black and Jewish, but is looking at our positionality and where do we hold power, and are we taking up a place that would be better occupied by someone else? And I think, you know, we can all be allies. I think we are at the birth of a new civil rights movement, and it's so exciting, and it's definitely something I want to be at the table for. But as a white person, I think humility is the key. I do not have the answer for racism. I have never experienced it. And so I can support, but I really don't want to get in the way of the people who have had that experience and therefore are really going to be able to be our best guides to the solution.
Right.
So I think
May I say a word? May I say a word?
Please, yes.
I don't know if you remember me.
No.
Don't even joke. Don't even joke. Of course. How could I forget? It's lovely to see you.
I was at your bat mitzvah.
Yeah. You're not in that picture, but you were there.
Bat mitzvah means daughter of the commandment or commitment, which means not only on the day that you're called to the Torah, but also for every day of your life. You are someone who is called upon to make the world a better place. And as your organization says, repair, which is tikkun olam, to repair the world. And I'm reminded of a sage that said, the meaning of life is to make this world a better place than when you entered it. And you are doing that, Lily, and we are so proud of you. So very proud. And also mazel tov on your recent marriage. So
thank you.
I just have to tell you from Toby and myself, just keep going. And we know that you will make a difference in this world. God bless.
Well, thank you so much. And, you know, I just feel like everything I am, I owe to my parents and also to my community, and being raised. I mean, I think my connection to Judaism has always been through Tikkun Olam. And I think I was raised that way by my parents, but also by our community, that we all have this sense of communal obligation. So to me, everybody here is a part of that. And I just keep learning and trying to do it a little better than I did it yesterday. So
You're doing a phenomenal job.
yeah.
Keep it up.
Lily, you don't know me, but I adore your parents. They know me. When you come back to Princeton, I would love to arrange for you to speak to some of the high school kids so that they can see what happens after you leave the Princeton area and how lucky you are to have been from here and to be part of our community. And I think it would be really, really powerful, because kids grow up here and then they leave and the kids that are here don't get it. So that would be wonderful to have you come speak. And even if it's not able to do there, we could do something outside, depending on COVID.
That would be great. And I'm always recruiting for my fellowship and my service course. So high school is getting close to eligible. So that's great.
Lily, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
I've been following your career these many years, from the time we moved here many years ago, and we're becoming a bat mitzvah, and I'm delighted to see our cantor and Toby having said what he said, and I not only agree, but my heart goes out to you and to you as well. Just a question, is there any of your work also involving the hospital? Volunteers at the hospital are not only necessary, but it's a time for perhaps some of your people who have need to give of themselves or who want to give of themselves, make connections that way with people who are alone, who don't have family. And it's also a learning situation. For instance, many of your volunteers might want to do something in a hospital in terms of preparing a future career, not knowing about perhaps being a physical therapist or a radiologist or somebody who is the driver of people from the OR to back to their room or vice versa, etc. It works for both as a benefit. So I'm just suggesting that if that is not part of your program, because it's something that I had worked with and in and run for many years as part of my career. And it made such a great, great difference. And there is, of course, the wonderful Jewish chaplain at the hospital who could be helpful, but it's the volunteer services person who could then connect young people who are thinking about careers, be exposed to what hospitals might be able to do for them. Perhaps, not to make them well again because they're well, but to think about a career, what they could do. And it's wide open that way, with great success, as a matter of fact. So you are successful, and mazel tov on your lovely marriage. And we hope to see you where we can dance with you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm counting on that dancing at some point. It's so wonderful to see you. We have not worked with hospitals, so I think that's a wonderful idea, and I hope it'll be more possible in the near future. I know a lot of hospitals are not accepting any visitors right
Not at this
now.
point, right?
But I think, yeah, I think that's a great idea for the future. And certainly that's a wonderful side product of our program, and something I talk to young people about is volunteering is a great way to test out different career fields and to build a resume. And I think, yeah, I think having that insight into the medical field would be really powerful. So yeah, thank you for the suggestion.